Thanks very much. Let me, in turn, call up Ken Marcus, the founder and president of the Brandeis Center for Human Rights, and Noah Pollack, a senior advisor at the Department of Education. And note, in government, the shorter your title is, the more important you are, so that Noah must be very important. Well, I'm delighted to moderate this panel while Ken and Noah think about what they're going to say. I'll just note, kind of reiterate or emphasize a theme that we've seen all day at this conference that I'm delighted and honored to have been invited to, and that is that this problem of anti-Semitism isn't just bad for the Jews or bad for America because America doesn't like anti-Semitism. It's bad for everyone because we know this from world history. Wherever anti-Semitism flares up, that's a leading indicator of underlying pathologies in the political culture in society. And that is why, ultimately, what we've been talking about today matters. And it's great that two of my favorite organizations, NRI and RJC, are united in that. All right. We have 20 minutes, so we have plenty of time to discuss all the nooks and crannies of the legal technicalities here. Let me start with this. Ken, you were in the government, now you're back at the Brandeis Center filing lawsuits. What are some of the effective legal responses to anti-Semitism?
Thank you, Ilya. Thank you to RJC and National Review. First, there's government, and there's been no administration that's been stronger in fighting anti-Semitism than the Trump administration. No question about it. Freezing funds, administrative investigations, lawsuits from the federal government, absolutely critical, and the use of contracts as well as grants, game-changing. We also need to use the courts with private party litigation. I mean, the fact is, education is important, but when it comes to really bad actors, you need to hit them hard, and that means litigation. That's why we've been suing Harvard, Berkeley, Stanford, many universities that tolerate anti-Semitic harm. But beyond that, you have to raise the price of this sort of misconduct, which means going after the perpetrators. That's why we're suing all of the different people who took over Hamilton Hall of Columbia University and held those janitors hostage. And then beyond that, you need to go after the organizations that are organizing, that are training, that are funding all of this, which is why we're going after them as well. And then you need to trace the money, often offshore, to see where this is all coming from. So that's something that we do through litigation, holding institutions accountable, getting discovery that will bring transparency to what they're doing, and then through either settlement or victory, making sure they stop.
And just to be clear, you're suing universities not under the theory that anti-Semitism is bad, but let's flesh that out so everyone's clear on what exactly, how exactly they're violating the law.
Well, lots of different ways. So sometimes it is violating the free exercise of religion. Sometimes it is permitting assault and battery and vandalism and other wrongs that, yes, they're criminal, but they also constitute a hostile environment in violation of Title VI. Sometimes there are other laws that they violate as well.
Noah, you're in the education department. You're involved in some of these discussions. What's your experience?
There's obviously a great number of things that federal agencies can do to try to combat anti-Semitism on campus. I think these are all admirable and worthy causes. I have a couple of sort of notes of caution, I guess, having, that I think probably Ken would probably share as someone who was also in the same department, which is that the enforcement powers of an agency like the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education, I think works very well when there's a few offenders and it can really focus on them. When you have a very widespread problem, it becomes harder to enforce, and you sort of end up in this position of having to pick out very bad actors and trying to hold them accountable. And I think that one of the things we've seen over the past couple of years especially is that the anti-Semitism problem on campus has gotten so widespread that there's a need for also kind of policy levers to be enacted to encourage reforms on campus to get at the root of the problem, as opposed to simply being able to handle it. It's like a bad enough problem now that you can't just handle it with enforcement. You have to try to look at, to go upstream at the real sources of it, which we can, talk about.
Please do.
Okay. So I think specifically in the higher ed context, a big theory here is that one of the reasons why you see so much anti-Semitism is because it is driven by certain kind of white-hot core bad actors on campuses. And these tend to be things like the Middle East Studies Department. And basically any department or program that has the word studies in it tends to be a place where very radical, kind of Marxist-oriented people congregate. And those people have discovered Zionism and Israel, and it's now like their favorite thing. And they are actually the ones in the campus protests who tend to like work with the students and help organize them and train them how to be, little radicals. And the question becomes, why are they awash in this type of activism? And I think one reason is that the campuses are actually awash in money, especially in the elite universities. Over the past 40 or 50 years, the tax code has actually been tweaked and rigged and modified in so many different ways that creates a lot of advantages for universities, to the point where the universities now have so much money that they can spend on essentially luxury goods. And so like a normal person, if you have excess income, the luxury goods you might buy would be like a nice vacation or a sports car or a country house. And for a university, the luxury goods they spend on is the gender studies department, and it's DEI bureaucracies. And it's every time there's going back to the 60s actually, you can look at every time there's a sort of wave of protest movement, it is accompanied by demands from the university for more funding, for more gen ed courses, for more departments, for more hires, for more guaranteed sinecures for left-wing activist people on the campus. And we've gotten to the place now in the year 2026 where the campuses are just awash in those types of people. And so you have a lot of anti-Semitism because that's what those people want. And so my view is that, and this may sound a little crazy, but I'm totally convinced of this, and I'm working on this, that if you actually look at adjustments to the tax code, that will translate into less anti-Semitism because the universities would be compelled to sober up, to get back to the core mission of education and the pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of excellence. And they would actually have to drop a lot of the kind of insane nonsense departments and like fake academic programs that they are doing. That's sort of an example of going very upstream of the problem.
Noah, clearly you've been reading my last book, Lawless, The Miseducation of America's Elites. It details
on my nightstand.
Bureaucratization problem. But I want to follow the money, as both of you said. And I saw you talking to my colleague Tal Fortgang in the green room, who was up on stage earlier, talking about changing the tax code to follow the money, to make it easier to follow the money and to get at some of these funders of this illiberal, shall we say, development. Ken, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that's one of the advantages also of litigation. So, for example, this wasn't one of our cases, but the Lawfare Project brought a lawsuit against Carnegie Mellon. And one of the things that they found is enormous amounts of money coming from Qatar to the university. And in exchange, some of the agreements, and this isn't just Carnegie Mellon, this is other universities also, is that they send their people to Qatar. They give Qatar an opportunity to have input on who they're hiring, including the people who, if a Jewish student complains about anti-Semitism, the person the complaint goes to is someone that a Qatari entity was involved in vetting and developing their position. So we need to see where the money's coming from. We need full transparency. We need proper enforcement if they're not providing transparency. And we need to know what are the strings attached. What is the influence that foreign entities are buying when they provide hundreds of millions of dollars to these universities?
Is the education department starting to investigate those things?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things that we've done is it's something called Section 117, and it's a part of the Higher Education Act that requires universities that receive above a certain dollar amount of money from a foreign donor to disclose to the Department of Education that money. There was a portal where this was easily available online in the first Trump administration, and it's actually kind of remarkable, but one of the first things the Biden administration did was they shut the portal down. and they made it incredibly difficult to find this data. And they basically buried it. And one of the things that we worked on in the first year that is now out as of like 3 weeks ago is a very easy to use portal where, and I'm forgetting the URL of it, but you can Google like Section 117 portal, but that reports all this. And I don't know if you've seen in the past month, there have been a bunch of stories in the press about the gargantuan amounts of money, billions and billions of dollars that have been pouring into elite US universities, primarily from Qatar and China. That is because of the new reporting requirements that Section 117, I have to credit my colleague Paul Moore, he was the guy who spearheaded this. But that's been a big one in showing the foreign money. Another piece of, like you mentioned, the tax code, like another piece of this that Tal Fortgang is working on, and some of us in the administration are, is on.
I believe Senator Cruz's shop is spearheading that. I think they just dropped legislation.
Yeah,
actually.
they have a bill that just came out. There's something called fiscal sponsorships, and I won't bore you with all the details, but basically, a fiscal sponsorship is where an existing nonprofit organization for someone who's like starting up a fledgling new group, they can fiscally sponsor that group until that group has its own 501c3 tax status and can like accept donations on its own. This is just a customary practice, but over the past 15 years or so, particularly on the left and on the far left, they realized that there was there were really no restrictions on this, and you could just run whole organizations via fiscal sponsorships. And what this does is it means you can raise money, tax deductible money, which is much easier to raise than non-tax deductible money, and never have to disclose who the money's going to, what it's funding, how much money. Whereas if you're, we have all worked in the nonprofit world and are familiar with the Form 990, which is the tax return you have to file if you're a C3, that discloses your budget, who the board is, who you're paying. It's the basic trade-off for being able to operate as a tax-deductible, a tax-exempt charity. Changing the fiscal sponsorship rules to compel disclosure of who's being funded via fiscal sponsorships would basically be a neutron bomb going off in the world of radical left-wing kind of criminal activism. Because all of those projects, you all know what Students for Justice in Palestine is. Go try to find their EIN. Go try to find a 990 for them. You can't. They're not a real organization. They're not incorporated. They're funded entirely via fiscal sponsorships, and they have been for 20 years. That's why no one knows how much money do they have. Where's the money coming from? What are they spending it on? So things in the tax code, they may sound boring, but they would be very effective in creating some disclosure.
Can organizations like Students for Justice in Palestine have been thrown off some campuses? Can more of that sort of thing be done? What's the legal justification there at either public or private schools?
Mostly when they're thrown off of campus, it's because they have violated content-neutral, viewpoint-neutral rules. That is to say, they are bound by the same rules as every other organization, but they are not following them. And too often, they're given a pass. But every once in a while, a university has the backbone to enforce them. There are some, but not very many, who say, look, we're not just going to say we will deal with them only if they violate content-neutral rules. They will say, especially if they're private institutions, we have our own values, and we get to say what clubs or organizations are outside or inconsistent with those values. And that's especially been true of religious institutions that have sometimes said, look, it's not just that they're breaking our rules, it's that hate organizations have no place here. I would like to see more institutions, especially private and religious institutions, have the backbone to say we stand for something. And this hate, this anti-Semitism, this bigotry is not what we stand for.
Noah, what do you think, we're fast talking, our timer has stopped. The time has stood still because of the mesmerizing remarks here. So somebody's gonna have to give me the gong because the timer's stopped, but we're fast talking lawyers up here, so we've run out of the questions that we had discussed. What about, I'm gonna throw out here, deportations and there's in the news about students who who are involved in protests and other illegal behavior, not just First Amendment protests, but all these things. MIT famously did not want to discipline clear violators of the law, people who were engaged in vandalism and blockades and so forth, because so many of them were on student visas, which would then have been jeopardized. What more can or should be done in that space?
Yeah, I mean, it's been such a refreshing and inspiring change to see Secretary Rubio stand up and say very clearly, coming to study in this country is a privilege, not a right, and you are a guest here, and you ought to behave like a guest. And if you come to this country and you go, marauding through our campuses like it's Gaza City there, you will be shown the door. And a lot of people have been sent packing, and it's just fantastic. And it is an act of I think, principled leadership and moral clarity that has been phenomenal, and that actually, you'll notice that lately, even despite all of the news coming out of the Middle East, you have not seen the kind of campus protests that we saw in the year after October 7th. And I have a feeling that a big part of it is because of things like that, where it is no longer a consequence-free zone on campus. You don't get to just do whatever you want. So that stuff is very important. The issue of foreign students is a very important one. I think people don't realize, especially among the more elite campuses, so-called elite campuses, just what percentage of foreign students are. I mean, among the more Ivy League level schools, like top 50 schools, around a quarter of the campus is foreign students. For most of post-World War II U.S. history.
At Columbia, it's a majority of graduate students, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's more prevalent in the graduate programs, because the graduate programs for the schools are basically just money makers, and the foreign students come in and pay full tuition, and so you get more of that. But in the post-World War II era, the percentage of foreign students as enrolled undergraduates was always around 2%. It's now up to 6%, and that's across all the campuses. And in the elite schools, it's gone way, way up. And it's created this problem where before it was like the cultural exchange ran in the good direction, which was there was a sprinkling of people from other countries who came to America. They learned about our values, our traditions. They hopefully would go back home, and they became leaders of their countries, and they had friendships with America and understood America. And that was like good for America. Now the cultural exchange goes the other way, where they come to the United States, and there's so many of them, and many of them are from cultures that frankly are not particularly compatible with the type of values that we want on a campus, on a Western US campus. And they get our kids spun up on third worldist type causes and radical causes. And so they're influencing our kids to be radical. And so one thing that would be very helpful, and that the administration has been working on, is reducing the foreign student prevalence to a more responsible level, both for this reason and also because universities in America are actually supposed to, they are charities, they're 501c3s, and they are actually supposed to be operated for the benefit of Americans and not just be kind of sold out to whoever wants to come from all over the world. If you wanted to do that, you could run a for-profit business, but these are nonprofits, and they're not supposed to operate that way.
Ken, I'll give you the last word real quick. What's one more thing that should be done, either in terms of lawsuits from the administration or otherwise from a policy perspective, to combat anti-Semitism?
The White House drove very important, high-profile cases against a few major institutions at the beginning of the administration. Now we need to hit the pivot. There are a much greater number of institutions that need to be reached, and that means a shift towards the departments that need to do the grinding work of investigations and resolutions. And when they do that, the most important thing is not to try to get a big check from the university, but rather a change that will make a difference. And when they make that change that has a difference, it needs to be specific. Because the fact is, when it comes to anti-Semitism, there's this Potter Stewart saying, when you see it, he said about pornography, with anti-Semitism, if there's right-wing anti-Semitism, they see it. If there's left-wing anti-Semitism, they don't even see it. So you need specificity in the agreements. And what I would recommend is that there's nothing stronger than the Trump executive orders on anti-Semitism. They need to be part of the agreements. And if they are driving those agreements, then we're going to see some substance and some change.
Great. Well, thanks very much. Join me in thanking Ken and Noah.